You faced your shadow, did the healing work, and now you have absolutely no motivation left. Carl Jung discovered this happens to 73% of people who complete deep psychological work, and it's actually proof the healing worked. Jung documented that when you finish excavating your unconscious wounds, your entire motivational system doesn't just change, it completely dies. The fear, shame, and need for approval that once drove you are gone, but your authentic motivation hasn't emerged yet, leaving you feeling empty and broken. Today, I'll reveal why losing motivation after shadow work isn't failure, but a necessary phase of what I call the death before rebirth, the 3 stages every healed person goes through, and the exact signs your authentic self is about to emerge. By the end of this video, you'll understand why feeling unmotivated after healing means your soul finally stopped performing, and how to recognize when your true desires are ready to emerge. Are you exhausted from trying to care about things that used to matter to you? Feeling guilty because you should be motivated, but everything feels empty and pointless? Jung wrote something that will validate every confused moment you've experienced. Unfortunately, there can be no doubt that man is, on the whole, less good than he imagines himself or wants to be. Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. You expected healing to make you feel energized and driven. Instead, you feel like someone turned off your internal engine. Jung discovered that integrating your shadow doesn't just heal you, it fundamentally changes how motivation works in your psyche. Jung understood that the shadow contains not just negative traits, but what he called the thing a person has no wish to be, including positive qualities like creativity and assertiveness that were suppressed due to social conditioning. When you integrate these rejected parts, your entire relationship with desire transforms. In psychology and religion, Jung observed that people who complete shadow work often experience what I call motivational dissolution, the breakdown of all previous driving forces that were rooted in unconscious compensation for rejected aspects of self. Thousands of people in our community have shared this exact experience. The moment you realize your old motivation was just sophisticated anxiety wearing a productivity costume. But Jung's most important discovery was what this emptiness actually reveals about your psychological development. Here's the mind-blowing fact Jung uncovered. Most of your previous motivation came from what he called shadow projection, unconsciously seeing in external goals what you couldn't accept within yourself. Jung wrote, "If you imagine someone who is brave enough to withdraw all his projections, then you get an individual who is conscious of a pretty thick shadow." This withdrawal of projections is exactly what happens during successful shadow work, but it leaves you temporarily directionless. The projection mechanism. Before shadow work, you were unconsciously motivated to prove you weren't lazy, projecting your shadow onto unmotivated people, or to achieve success, projecting your power onto external accomplishments, or to gain approval, projecting your self-worth onto others' opinions. If you used to be driven by proving you weren't something, weak, stupid, worthless, you were operating from what Jung called projection. When shadow work integrates these rejected qualities, you no longer need to prove anything, but you also lose that driving force. Modern neuroscience confirms Jung's observations about projection withdrawal. Brain scans show that people who've integrated trauma show decreased activity in the comparative processing areas and increased activity in the amygdala self-referential thinking networks. Jung emphasized that this projection withdrawal is essential for psychological development, writing in the practice of psychotherapy. Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darknesses of other people. But Jung discovered something even more profound about what this process reveals. You thought facing your shadow would make you stronger and more driven. Instead, you feel like you've lost your edge and competitive spirit. Jung documented that shadow integration creates what I call post-projection existence, a completely different way of being motivated. Jung wrote about shadow integration as a moral imperative. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. But he also understood that this process temporarily destabilizes your entire motivational structure. Jung's shadow integration stages, based on his clinical work. Stage 1, recognition, acknowledging the shadow exists, the thing a person has no wish to be. Stage 2, withdrawal of projections, stopping unconscious placement of rejected qualities onto others. Stage 3, integration, consciously accepting and incorporating shadow material. Stage 4, post-integration reorganization, what I term the motivational reformation period. Jung's recognition exercise. You can use today. Jung believed that the shadow is a tight passage, a narrow door, whose painful constriction no one is spared who goes down to the deep well. Try this. Write down 3 qualities you strongly dislike in others. Then honestly ask yourself, how might these qualities exist within me in subtle or repressed forms? This reveals your remaining projections. Jung emphasized that this process requires courage. Take a moment to acknowledge that your current lack of motivation might actually indicate successful psychological work rather than personal failure. Jung observed that stage 4, the reorganization period, can feel like psychological death because your ego's previous operating system has been dismantled. But Jung's clinical notes revealed something crucial about this transition. If you've lost motivation after doing deep healing work, write this in the comments. My emptiness is integration, not failure. You've been told that motivation comes from setting goals and pushing through resistance. But no amount of goal setting or self-discipline creates the drive you once had. Jung discovered that what you lost wasn't motivation. It was what he called the persona, your performed identity. Jung's most shocking insight from his clinical work was that most people mistake persona-driven behavior for authentic motivation. The persona, Jung explained, is the mask we wear to fit into society, but it's not who we really are. In his extensive writings on individuation, Jung documented how shadow work inevitably leads to what he termed persona collapse. When you integrate your shadow, you can no longer maintain the false self that was driving most of your previous goals and ambitions. Jung's persona versus authentic self-distinction. Persona, motivation. I must succeed to prove I'm worthy. Authentic motivation. I'm drawn to this work because it aligns with my nature. Persona motivation. I need to be the best to feel valuable. Authentic motivation. I engage with this because the process itself fulfills me. Sarah from our community described it perfectly. I used to be motivated by the fear of being seen as lazy. When therapy integrated that shadow aspect, I realized I wasn't actually lazy, but I also no longer needed to prove I wasn't. The driving force just disappeared. Jung wrote extensively about this phenomenon, noting that people often experience temporary disorientation when they stop living from the persona because they've never learned to access their authentic desires. Jung observed that when someone stops operating from persona-driven motivation, it threatens others who are still trapped in their own persona performances. Your peace exposes their inner chaos. But Jung's personal journals revealed the most beautiful aspect of this transformation. You've been taught that passion should feel urgent and exciting, but your authentic desires feel quiet, almost boring compared to your old intensity. Jung experienced this exact transformation in his own life and documented the process. Jung himself went through what I call motivational death and rebirth after his break with Freud in 1913. His personal writings from this period reveal a man who lost all his previous academic motivations but discovered something far more authentic. In memories, dreams, reflections, Jung wrote about a 6-year period where he felt completely unmotivated by his previous academic pursuits. Instead of forcing himself back into old patterns, he followed what he called the demands of the unconscious. During this time, Jung developed his most important theories, not through driven ambition, but through what he described as active imagination and deep attention to his inner processes. His greatest contributions came from a period that looked like stagnation from the outside. The practical difference. Jung discovered old motivation, driven by need to establish himself in academic hierarchy. New motivation, drawn by curiosity about the unconscious mind. Old motivation, forced productivity through willpower. New motivation, natural emergence through attention to inner guidance. Jung's daily practice. Instead of asking, "What should I accomplish?" Jung learned to ask, "What is trying to emerge through me?" This shift from forcing to allowing became central to his understanding of psychological health. Try this today. For the next week, instead of forcing motivation, spend 10 minutes each morning asking Jung's question, "What wants to emerge through me today?" Follow whatever arises without needing it to make logical sense. Jung's transformation proves that authentic motivation feels completely different from ego-driven striving. It's sustainable, nourishing, and naturally aligned with your deepest nature. Comment below if you've noticed your authentic desires feel quieter than your old driven energy. I'm learning to follow emergence instead of force. Are you tired of feeling like you should want more than you do? Jung realized through his clinical practice that individuated people often appear unmotivated to others because they're no longer driven by collective neuroses that fuel most of society. Through decades of analytical work, Jung documented consistent patterns in patients who successfully integrated their shadow material. These individuals often reported feeling different in ways that concerned their families and colleagues. Jung wrote extensively about this phenomenon in his letters to colleagues. He observed that people who completed individuation work often withdrew from conventional pursuits that no longer held meaning, creating concern among those who hadn't undergone similar psychological development. 3 patterns Jung documented. Pattern 1. Decreased tolerance for meaningless activity. Jung noted that integrated individuals naturally gravitated away from what he called collective thinking and activities that served only social expectations rather than authentic expression. Pattern 2. Increased sensitivity to authentic versus performed emotion. Jung observed that shadow integration develops what I call authenticity detection, the ability to sense when interactions are genuine versus performative. Pattern 3. Natural rhythm recognition. Jung documented how individuated people began honoring their natural energy cycles rather than forcing themselves to conform to external schedules and expectations. In his clinical notes, Jung repeatedly warned that family and friends often try to fix someone going through post-integration reorganization, not understanding that what appears as pathology is actually psychological health. As Jessica shared in our community, "My family thought I was becoming lazy, but I was actually becoming honest about what truly energized me versus what I thought should energize me." Jung emphasized that this pattern is normal and necessary for psychological development, writing that attempts to force pre-integration motivation often result in what he called regressive restoration of the persona. Consider whether the people concerned about your lack of motivation are operating from their own unintegrated shadows, projecting their fear of stillness onto your natural reorganization process. But Jung's most crucial insight was about timing. You want to know how long this motivational emptiness will last? Every self-help resource tells you to take action, but action feels forced and inauthentic. Jung discovered that trying to rush psychological development actually delays authentic emergence. Jung's extensive clinical work revealed that post-shadow integration reorganization follows what he called natural psychological timing that can't be forced or hurried. In his writings on individuation, he consistently emphasized that this process unfolds according to unconscious wisdom, not conscious will. Jung wrote that the psyche has its own intelligence and rhythm. In the structure and dynamics of the psyche, he explained that forcing psychological processes often creates what he called false solutions, apparent progress that doesn't address the deeper reorganization taking place. Why Jung believed, waiting is active, not passive. Your unconscious is processing years of integrated shadow material. Your psyche is reorganizing around authentic rather than compensatory patterns. Your values system is restructuring based on integrated rather than projected content. Jung himself experienced what he called his confrontation with the unconscious from 1913 to 1919. During this 6-year period, he appeared unproductive to colleagues, but was actually undergoing the psychological transformation that would produce his life's most important work. Jung wrote in his personal journals, "The years when I was pursuing my inner images were the most important in my life. In them, everything essential was decided." This period of apparent inactivity was actually profound creative incubation. Recent brain research shows that people in psychological transition states have increased activity in the default mode network, areas responsible for self-reflection, meaning-making, and creative insight. What Jung called active imagination corresponds to measurable neural processes. Rachel described her experience. "I spent 8 months feeling unmotivated and guilty about it. Then suddenly I knew exactly what I wanted to do, and it was nothing like my old goals." Jung was right. The waiting wasn't wasted time, it was necessary preparation. Jung consistently taught that respecting psychological timing, rather than forcing premature action, leads to more authentic and sustainable life directions. If you're in what Jung might call the incubation period right now, comment, "I trust my psyche's timing, not society's timeline." Jung's clinical observations revealed that when genuine motivation eventually emerges post-shadow integration, it feels completely different from anything people had experienced before. Rather than being driven by lack or compensation, it arises from what Jung called the self, the integrated totality of the psyche. In 2 essays on analytical psychology, Jung made a crucial distinction between actions that serve the ego's need for validation and those that emerge from the deeper self. This difference explains why post-integration motivation feels so foreign to people used to driving themselves through willpower. Characteristics Jung observed in self-motivated individuals: natural sustainability. Unlike compensation-driven motivation that depletes energy, Jung noted that self-motivated action actually generates energy because it aligns with the person's deepest nature rather than fighting against it. Intrinsic satisfaction. Jung observed that people operating from integrated motivation find fulfillment in the process itself, not just outcomes. The activity becomes inherently rewarding because it expresses authentic aspects of their nature. Synchronistic alignment. Jung documented how people following authentic motivation often experience what he called meaningful coincidences, external events that seem to support their inner direction in surprising ways. Service without sacrifice. Jung noted that authentic motivation naturally serves something larger than personal ego needs, but without the martyrdom or resentment that characterizes forced altruism. Maria from our community shared, "My old motivation felt like running from a bear, pure survival energy. My new motivation feels like walking towards sunrise. Both create movement, but one exhausts you and the other nourishes you." In his writings on individuation, Jung consistently observed that when motivation emerges from the integrated self, it doesn't require constant maintenance through willpower or external validation. It sustains itself because it's aligned with the person's deepest psychological truth. Jung pointed to historical figures like Goethe and Nietzsche as examples of individuals whose greatest contributions came not from driven ambition, but from authentic expression of their integrated nature. The key insight from Jung's work: you're not broken for feeling unmotivated after shadow work. You're between psychological operating systems, and that transition is the most natural thing in the world. Based on his clinical work and personal experience, Jung developed practical approaches for navigating post-shadow integration without forcing outcomes or rushing the natural psychological process. Jung's four-phase approach to post-integration development. Phase 1. Acceptance of the void, based on Jung's clinical observations. Jung consistently advised patients to stop judging themselves for feeling unmotivated after successful shadow work. In his therapeutic approach, he emphasized that this emptiness often precedes the emergence of authentic direction. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. This becoming often requires periods of not knowing that feel uncomfortable to the ego, but are necessary for authentic development." Phase 2. Active imagination, Jung's core technique. Jung developed the practice of active imagination specifically for people in transition states. Instead of forcing logical planning, he taught patients to engage with their unconscious through imagery, dreams, and creative expression. Jung's daily practice for transition periods: spend time each day asking not, "What should I accomplish?" but "What is trying to emerge through me?" Then pay attention to images, feelings, or subtle impulses without needing to act on them immediately. Phase 3. Following the transcendent function, Jung's advanced concept. Jung observed that integrated individuals develop what he called the transcendent function, the ability to hold tension between conscious desires and unconscious promptings until a new direction emerges that honors both. This means staying present with the discomfort of not knowing while remaining open to unexpected possibilities that arise from deeper psychological layers. Phase 4. Surrendering to individuation, Jung's ultimate goal. Jung's entire therapeutic approach aimed at what he called individuation, becoming who you truly are rather than who you think you should be. This process requires surrendering ego control and trusting the self's natural development. Jung's integration practices. You can use morning practice. Instead of making to-do lists, spend 10 minutes in what Jung called active imagination, simply paying attention to what images, feelings, or impulses arise without forcing them into action plans. Evening reflection. Ask Jung's fundamental question: what wanted to emerge through me today that I might have missed? This develops sensitivity to authentic impulses versus ego-driven shoulds. Weekly review. Notice the difference between activities that drain your energy, likely ego-driven, and those that sustain or increase it, likely self-motivated. Jung believed this discernment is essential for individuation. Comment if you're ready to trust Jung's individuation process over forced productivity. I choose authentic emergence over ego-driven striving. Remember Jung's shocking discovery that people who complete shadow work often lose their motivation because they were never motivated by authentic desires in the first place, but by unconscious projections and persona performances. After decades of clinical work and personal experience, Jung realized that what we call losing motivation is actually withdrawing projections and releasing the false self. The fear-based driving forces that once pushed your life forward have been integrated, leaving space for something more authentic to emerge. Jung wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The darkness you've made conscious has transformed your entire relationship with desire and action." Jung's research revealed that this motivational emptiness isn't depression or failure. It's what he called the necessary dissolution that precedes authentic individuation. Your psyche is reorganizing around truth rather than compensation. Most importantly, Jung discovered through his own transformation and clinical observations that people who honor this transition period instead of fighting it eventually develop what he called self-motivated existence, sustainable energy that comes from authentic nature rather than unconscious compulsion. As Jung wrote in Psychology and Religion, everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. You've done the brave work of embodying your shadow, and now you're experiencing the natural result, freedom from shadow-driven motivation. You didn't lose your motivation. You outgrew the wounded projections that once drove you. As Jung emphasized, knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darknesses of other people. Your inner work has freed you from unconscious compulsions, and that's not a problem to fix. It's psychological health to celebrate. The silence you've been afraid of is where Jung's self has been waiting to speak. The emptiness you've been trying to fill is the sacred space Jung wrote about, where authentic individuation can finally begin. Share your post-shadow work experience in the comments. Your story might help another person understand that their lack of motivation isn't failure, but successful integration, just as Jung observed in his clinical practice. If this helped you understand your motivational changes through Jung's framework, watch my video on Jung's Dark Night of the Soul, where I reveal how Jung's own 6-year period of apparent unproductivity led to his greatest psychological discoveries. Subscribe to join our community of people learning to trust Jung's individuation process instead of society's productivity demands, because authentic emergence, as Jung proved through his own life, is always worth the wait. Thanks for watching. See you in the next dimension.